find injured animals. And so to start out, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I went to the University of San Diego, where I was a member of the Eta Gamma chapter. I ended up getting my degree in psychology, and a lot of people often laugh when I tell them that my degree is in psychology and I worked with animals. And I did that because I wanted to be a dolphin trainer, so I used my degree actually every day as a dolphin trainer through taking animal behavior courses and learning theories and cognitive theories. So when I first started working with animals, I was a dolphin trainer for a few years. And then after I left that job, I managed a stingray and shark exhibit at the Jacksonville Zoo and the Toronto Zoo. And then I came back to California and was working at the Monterey Bay Aquarium as a volunteer, and then I've had some seasonal jobs there. So I got to work with cephalopods, which were like cuttlefish, octopus, squid, and various other fish around the aquarium in different areas. I've worked with parrots and trained parrots, reptiles, and then my most recent job was working as a wildlife rehabilitator at the SPCA for Monterey County out here in California. And then I also put on there that I was an OWCN volunteer, which is the Oiled Wildlife Care Network in California, which is a series of an organization that trains volunteers to respond in the event of an oil spill in the state of California. So to start out, I think kind of some of the biggest questions we always have is like, how do I find my local wildlife rehabilitator? Because it is not always straightforward. It was very easy where I'm from in my county, in Monterey County out in California. We had one central center, and we were the only center for the area. Unfortunately, not every county works that way, so some areas might just have individual rehabilitators that work out of their house, and they specialize in certain species. So it can be very frustrating trying to figure out who to get a hold of. So one of the best resources you can do is go to your state Fish and Wildlife Department website. You can just put in the search engine on that website, you know, wildlife rehabilitation, and they should be able to provide you with a list, breakdowns by county of everybody who has a permit to for wildlife rehabilitation, and they will also have species breakdowns because some centers or people might only specialize in one. My center that I worked at specialized in everything. We could do everything but the marine mammals, so that made it nice and easy for people in our area. But not everybody's like that. So checking out your state Fish and Wildlife Department. Sometimes calling the local animal control. They should know who responds to different animals in your county. There's also State Wildlife Rehabilitation Association. So again, you can go into Google and put your state and like Wildlife Rehabilitation Association. So I can go into, say, California Wildlife Rehabilitation Association, and their website should pop up, and again, should have lists of rehabilitators in that area. There are also 2 apps out there that you can download on your phone, and these are great because if you're traveling, they will use the GPS on your phone and pull up the wildlife rehabilitators that are closest to you. Because being in Monterey, we had a lot of people that were visiting, and so they would always say they had trouble trying to figure out who to go to. So that's a great thing. And you can say, take pictures on one of the apps and send it to the wildlife rehabber, choose what kind of animals you're finding, and that helps kind of sort out who you would be needing to contact. There are also 2 national organizations, the IWRC, which is the International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council, and NWRA, which is the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association. They also have directories on their websites to help you find local rehabilitators. And if you are, for some chance, Googling local wildlife, please make sure you're calling somebody that's closest to you. I have definitely gotten calls from people in Ohio and Texas, and there's not a whole lot I can do to help them, and I often don't know who's going to be their best resource because I am not familiar with that state. So just make sure you are going to your nearest rehabber. So when you find an animal, what do I do? That was always kind of the biggest question. I didn't know what to do. So being as observant as possible is really helpful. So giving the best description of the animal you can. And that just helps the rehabber know if I'm responding to the call, to make sure that I know what type of animal I'm responding to so I can be prepared. For instance, somebody called me once and said, oh, I have a hawk in a field. And so I went down to pick up a hawk, and it was not a hawk, it was an eagle. And an eagle is definitely more of a two-person job than a one-person job. And that also helps you, know what kind of equipment I need, because I needed different equipment for an eagle than for a hawk. So being able to give the best description, color, feet, beaks, all things to kind of look at when you're describing the animals. Observing the animal is really important, and being able to give the best description of what is going on, more than just, oh, it's injured. It's, it looks funny. Like being able to describe it, so looking for blood, looking at the wings or the limbs. So for birds, if it has a broken wing, the wing is most likely going to be drooping below the tail or dragging on the ground. So that would be something you would be looking for. If it's tucked up nice and tight and both wings look like they're being held evenly, then something is not wrong with the wings typically. So we can kind of rule that out. Looking at the eyes and mouth, seeing, if you see anything wrong, any eye trauma, anything weird with the mouth. All of that stuff, again, is going to help us know how to respond to that call. For instance, like a broken wing on a seagull, I might need to bring a second person with me, because even though the wing is broken and they can't fly, a seagull can run like crazy, so it helps to have a second person to be able to chase that animal down. Trying to approach the animal. I know a lot of people are always afraid to try and approach them. They might scare them off, or if something happens to them or it reacts to them. But it's really important to know how these animals are going to react to a person approaching them. And because sometimes it might just be laying there and you start to walk up to it and it gets up and walks away and everything is fine. So being able to walk up and say, I got this close, I was able to touch it. And doing it with caution. Like if you have a buck that is injured, you don't want to be walking at the buck head on, but maybe, try and approach it from the backside and just slowly, don't charge it, just looking at how the animal is responding to you. Are they lifting their head? Are they noticing your presence? Are they trying to get away from you? Things like that is always very helpful. So if it's possible and if it's safe, staying with the animal is always key. Not every wildlife rehabber can respond. I was lucky enough that I worked at a facility where we were able to send our technicians out. We went out and we did rescues out in the field. But we did not respond unless somebody was there, because so much can happen in that 30 to 45 minutes that it would take us to get out to the animal. Somebody else could find the animal could die, or they could take off. Many people would say, oh, it's not going anywhere. But again, going back to like the seagull with the broken wing, it might not be able to fly, but it can run. So by the time I get there, it could be several blocks away or down the beach in the other direction. So staying with the animal and watching it is always really key and very helpful to the rehabilitator. And if you can, contain the animal. And I will be showing in a couple slides how to contain animals, but being able to put them in a box, put something in it so that it's in one spot, that's a big relief too, so that we don't have to really rush out. We know it's contained in one spot and it's safe. It gives us a little bit more time, and we don't have to worry about it running away. And always call your local wildlife rehabilitation center or rehabber to ask questions and let them know. So these are all things that you want to make sure you've paid attention to before you call them, because they're going to be asking you all these questions so that they can get the best idea if the animal needs help and what they need to help it. So please call them for any further details. So here's a little video of some pelicans, and the little blackbird in the front is a cormorant. So this would be an example. Okay, I found a pelican on the beach. I'm going to follow them. If you see, the first pelican has his wings tucked up. He's walking fine. But the other three are kind of struggling. They're limping. They're holding their wings out kind of funny. That's to kind of balance them because they're having trouble walking because they have leg injuries. General rule of thumb, if you can walk up to an animal and touch it, it probably needs help. If you're kind of walking after them, you could see, okay, it's limping, so you could tell the person hey, it's limping, it's not looking so good. So being able to take in a lot of different things about the animal is very helpful. And then this next slide is going to be a video of um,
So if you find a
what
wild
to do
animal, there's a few
to
things you
contain
can
an
do.
animal.
If you have a dog crate handy, you can always put the animal inside the dog crate. If you find like a small bird and you're comfortable handling it, you can find a shoebox or any type of box, a Tupperware container, put a little bit of paper towels or washcloth in it, and then you can just pick up the bird, place a lid on it, and place it in a nice, quiet, dark area until you can get it to us. If you were to find a bird and you're comfortable picking it up, you take the towel, cover them up, pick them up by the wings, and if they're moving their head around a lot like a seagull or a shorebird would do, you can always kind of grab the head and kind of carry them like that. If you find a mammal or a raptor like an owl or a hawk, you can get a big box or even like a laundry basket and just place it right on top of them, and that will keep them contained until we can come and pick them up.
So those are just kind of a few ideas if you find an animal, how to handle it, how to contain it. Sometimes if we're finding a bird on a beach and it's near the water, you can pick it up and move it upshore out of the high tide line. All of those things you can do. If the animal is injured, you are allowed to touch them and bring them to safety. I know a lot of people always question us, and especially if you've talked to your wildlife rehabilitator and they say, yes, please, can you pick up this animal? Can you bring it to me? Being willing to be able to do that is always really helpful, and know that that is allowed. You're not going to get in trouble for that. So please don't. These are kind of the big things we've seen people do over the years. So please don't give them any food or water. It is everybody's like first response to want to feed them and give them water. And that's not actually anything good. A lot of these animals have very specialized diets, so we want to make sure that they are getting the appropriate food if they are getting food. But if they're coming to us and they're sick, getting them food might not be the first thing that we want to get them to. Sometimes we would get like a raptor in that's really emaciated, probably hasn't eaten in a very long time. Giving them food could actually have them die. So we want to make sure we're hydrating them first, and then we would slowly adding in like liquid diets before we work them up to solid foods. So that's kind of the last thing you want to worry about. Don't give them any food, don't give them any water. Just worry about getting them to your rehabilitator, and they can kind of go from there with that. Please don't Google how to care for any animals or any like online diets. Like I read online that I could feed this animal this, because a lot of times those are remedies that are not appropriate and you're not going to be giving the animals the right diets. I've seen like a baby scrub jay given spaghetti because they said it looks like a worm. And they couldn't break down the spaghetti, and he was constipated for like 3 days and didn't poop. I've seen raptors given like salami or lunch meat, which is definitely not anything part of their natural diets. So again, just getting them to your local rehabilitator is the best thing. These animals are extremely afraid of us. A lot of people think that cuddling them and talking to them and stroking them calms them, but most of the time they're just terrified of us. So getting them quiet, putting them in a nice quiet box, or if you have a towel, putting it over their head, reducing the stimulus, especially the stimulus of people. We are very scary to them, can help reduce their stress levels a lot. There are a lot of animals that can die simply from that stress, so we want to reduce that as much as possible. Please don't try and fix any wounds. I've seen birds come in with duct tape on them and various other things. It doesn't work very well. Please don't pick up any baby animals unless you have talked to your wildlife rehabilitator, and we'll be talking a little bit more about what to do when you find baby animals. And please don't put yourself in harm's way. So if it's a pretty scary situation, there's an animal in the middle of the road and there's a lot of traffic, or it's in a dangerous situation, I'm not saying don't help them, but just make sure you are out of harm's way. Get yourself in a safe spot where you can still see the animal. But if it's in the middle of a road, call 911, call your local highway patrol, so that they can come out and help with traffic control so that you're not going to be getting hurt. I had somebody that didn't want to wait for me to get to a deer that was stuck in some rocks at the beach and almost got swept away by waves before I got there. Um, so just, wait, get help, be reasonable, and use your common sense. And by law, you do have 48 hours to get the animals to your local rehabilitator. So again, don't try and keep them, don't try and take care of them. Get them to people that are experienced and know how to handle these species. And then something else I want to talk about was euthanasia. Euthanasia is a very big thing in the wildlife rehabilitation world. We cannot save every animal as much as we try. Um, we had about 50%, between 40 and 50% of the animals that came in had to be euthanized right away. That their wounds were just so bad that we could not help them. Animals are very good at hiding all of their injuries. So they are often very sick or very injured by the time they get to us, and wounds can't be done. And we also have to remember that these animals we have to be able to rehabilitate them to better than healthy, like a little bit more. So they have to be able to be released and be able to survive on their own. So we can't release things like one-winged birds because they can't fly and fend for themselves. So some of the common reasons that we had to euthanize were for broken bones and compound fractures, especially in birds. Their bones are so hollow that they just shatter, and a lot of times you can't even splint them or pin them. They're just broken in so many places. Compound fractures are when the bone is exposed through the skin. So if it's an older compound fracture, there's just too much bacteria that's been introduced, and a lot of times the tissue in the bone has started to die by the time it gets to us. Spinal trauma, if an animal is paralyzed, we can't do anything about that. Eye trauma, depending on the animal. A hawk comes in. Hawks need their eyesight for their food and for hunting. Sometimes that would be okay if they can't see out of an eye, they're going to be compromised, they're already coming into us, they look like they haven't been eating. That would be something we would have to euthanize them for. But there are some species that we might look at and say, it could live with one eye. Like I think we had an adult seagull come in once. Was healthy, I think just caught with like some fishing line. Was in healthy condition, had an injured eye. So obviously having only one eye hadn't compromised this animal, so we were able to release them. But again, it's case by case basis. And then there's some diseases that are not treatable, or we have to look at what we call herd health. So I would look at how many of that species, a similar species, are in care currently, and could we effectively quarantine this animal so that they are not in contact with any other animals that can get that. So like one of our big ones was this disease that pigeons can get. It's called trick, and it can be treated if caught early on before it progressed too far. But if we had 30 pigeons in the center, we couldn't treat one of them because it was a very highly contagious disease. So other birds would come in contact through us, through other means. So we would have to euthanize them. But if we didn't have any other pigeons and we just had this one pigeon, then we would look at treating it. So we kind of have to do those on case by case basis. Okay. I think I forgot to do a poll. So Amanda, do you want to do the poll from the very beginning?
Sure.
Put up our first poll.
So have you ever found an injured animal? Please select either yes or no. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. And we have had 50% say yes and 50% say no.
Okay.
Okay, and then our next poll is, do you know what to do and who to call? Yes, no, and A. And we had 75% say yes.
Okay, well, hopefully some of the resources that I gave will help you kind of find your local rehabilitators, and it's always good to be like super prepared. So start doing that research now, and in the event that something happens, then you'll be ready and know who to call. It's always a good thing because you never know when you're going to find an injured animal. So as of this point, does anybody have any questions?
I don't have any questions coming in just yet, but if you do have a question, please go ahead and type it into your questions pane.
Yeah, and then just let me know. So out of these pictures that are shown, I'm not sure if everybody knows what they are. So the picture on the left is a baby seagull. They are adorable. They're little polka dots. In the center, those are black phoebes. I'm not sure if they are found across the whole country, but we definitely have them out here in California. And then the one on the right is a baby coyote. So this bird that you're seeing down here on the bottom is not happy. I call this not a morning person. This is a western grebe. He was getting weighed and his temperature and his vitamins for the morning and jumped off the scale and then just decided to sit in the middle of the floor and scream at me while I was cleaning his bank. And I let him do it. And they are pretty evil birds. See, they have those beady red eyes. So one thing with seabirds and shorebirds is that for seabirds in particular, like the grebe down in the bottom, and up top, that's a surf scoter on the top left-hand picture with the bright colored beak. They are not very well equipped for being on land. They are pretty much designed to live almost 100% of their life on the water with the exception of when they are nesting. So when they get on land, their legs are not built to support their body weight. So they cannot stand, they cannot walk on land. They often cannot fly from land. And we usually say if you see a seabird on shore, not in the water, there is something wrong with them. So you can easily pick them up and take them to the nearest rehabilitator. Something's not quite right. Also, assuming we get a lot of assumptions that people would say, oh, this bird's on the beach. It obviously has broken legs. Not necessarily a broken leg because they can't stand and walk. They're just not designed for that. And again, flying because they need to be on water to take off. So they usually can't just fly straight from land. They do have a little bit of mobility on land, but it's not very much. Common things that we found with the seabirds when they are on shore, they are usually hypothermic. They are usually emaciated. So those are the two like prevalent things that we are finding wrong with them. And this can be usually due to lack of food. For some reason, they're not foraging very well. They're not being able to find their food source. So as they become more emaciated, it can compromise the rest of their body. They can't hold their body temperature as much. Feather quality might start to get a little compromised, so they end up on shore. With seabirds, feather quality is really, really important because they need to have their outer layer of feathers working perfectly to protect them and their downy feathers that are on the inside of that to keep them warm, especially like we're looking at Monterey Bay animals where our water temperature is at any given point between the year, usually in the mid-50s, mid to low 50s. Sometimes in the summer we might get a little bit higher, up towards 60 degrees, but it's pretty cold water. So if they are having to be on that water all the time, they need to make sure that their feathers are insulating properly. So sometimes we'll see if they've had a lack of nutrition, their feather quality will be compromised. As you see with the seagull down in the bottom left hand, we call those chicken nugget seagulls. He actually that's like cooking grease from a kitchen or from a restaurant. They usually don't cover their vats of oil very well, and seagulls are notorious for getting into them and smelling like chicken nuggets. So we usually just have to give them a bath and they're pretty okay. Some seabirds, we will find oil on them, not necessarily from an oil spill, but because there is natural seepage of oil out in the ocean. And so while they're out in the ocean, they might come across a little tar ball and get some oil on them. It's going to compromise their ability to regulate their temperature because they're now getting the cold water touching their body more often. So again, for the most part with those, we just have to get them washed and get them fattened back up and back out into the water. Fishing line entanglement is also a really big one for seabirds, seagulls, pelicans. So the top right picture is a common murre, and he has a lot of fishing line around him. Seagulls, we were forever getting seagulls with giant hooks out of their beaks and their feet and their wings. Pelicans also get huge hooks, weights on them. So that was something that we would commonly find. Sometimes we'd have cormorants that would come in that were actually biting fishing lines because the cormorants can dive under the water. And so while they were down there, if people were fishing, they would see the lures, think they were fish, and get them. And so then people were hooking the fishing line. Something very important is do not try to remove a hook or fishing line from the bird. So you can, if it's tangled in something, like the fishing line's gotten caught in a fence or something, you can cut it free from that, but it's always good to leave it in place because we need to know where the hooks were to look for wounds. So like on a seabird where they have really dense feathers, it's really hard to find a wound if it was just a small hook in there. So yeah, leaving the hooks in is great. And it's also going to hurt to be ripping a hook out of them. So we usually like to be able to sedate them or give them some kind of pain medication and numbing the area before we're removing the hooks. So it just makes it a lot nicer for them. So again, just leaving everything in, collecting the animal, calling your local wildlife rehabber. So I think that's kind of about it for our seabirds and shorebirds. And in some parts of the country, if you're living in the part of the country where you're more on ocean, you're probably going to encounter these more often than people that live inland. However, some of these species do live on lakes. I think grebes live on lakes throughout the country. So you might be encountering them in those circumstances too. So raptors, we got a lot of raptors in. So on the top, that's a barn owl. That is a classic barn owl display, defense display. They put their wings out, they'll put their head down, bob, they'll jump at you. They're pretty cute. So some of the reasons that they would come in, emaciation. So again, they're not finding food for some reason. And we would often, leave that to, okay, why aren't they finding food? Is this an eye issue? Is this some other issue? Being shot, we would actually get a lot of raptors in with gunshot wounds or sometimes just pellets. And we would see it sometimes more in rural areas if they might be going after chickens or ducks if they didn't have them properly contained. So people would shoot them. And so we would get them in, usually with just a couple broken wings or like a broken bone here or there, a broken wing. And we were usually fairly successful at the gunshot wounds as long as it wasn't too bad. Electrocution is another big one with raptors. If they are perching on power poles, since they have longer wingspans, like the red-tailed hawks, osprey, some of the bigger owls, like a great horned owl, that if they have their wings stretched out, they might be able to connect between two power lines. So we would often see, usually within the wing and then the leg area. Unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do for electrocutions. The electrocution just burns a lot of the skin and it doesn't allow it to rejuvenate. So we would try, but usually electrocution wounds are not a good thing. Broken wings and legs for various reasons, hitting cars, hitting windows. I'm not sure what else would be happening out there. So broken wings are kind of a case-by-case basis. In the bigger birds, like if you've got a bigger great horned owl or a red-tailed hawk or an eagle even, their bones are bigger. So we might have a better chance at pinning that if it is not too bad of a break, if it's only broken in one spot in a good area. Again, broken wings are really tough because they have to be able to fly. So if they're healing wrong, they're not going to be able to fly, or if it's too close to a joint, it might immobilize the wings and they wouldn't get full use out of it. So we just have to take those case by case. Poisoning is a big one. Um, it wasn't as bad in our area, but I do know a lot of rehabbers who do have to deal with lead and rodenticide poisoning. And actually, most animals, most raptors, and some small mammals do have some amount of rodenticides in their system. And that's because they're eating mice, gophers, rats, whatever, in areas where people are putting out traps, the rodenticide traps. Um, so if you can, make sure if you're treating for stuff like that, that you are using, do your research, use appropriate rodenticide, or try and find other humane ways without using chemical, because it does really affect those animals and it can weaken them and kill them. Lead poisoning we'd usually see in like raptor or vultures. We have turkey vultures out here because they're eating carrion, dead things, so they are more susceptible to getting lead poisoning from eating pellets or bullets that are made out of lead. And then falling from nests, that's kind of a big one during baby season. So down on the bottom right hand, that's a baby red-shouldered hawk. He's got lots of fluff and not very many feathers, so he definitely still needs to be in a nest. So if you saw something like that on the ground, you want to call your local rehabber, look for a nest, look for parents in the area, look for adults, see if you can find a nest. We would usually try and get a tree trimmer or a tree climber out to go climb the trees and put the babies back up in the nests for us. The guy up top, that's a like fledgling barn owl. So he might be doing this out of defense because he's not 100% a flyer. But one of these guys could easily be living on the ground okay. Barn owls actually fledge straight out of their nest boxes. But he's old enough. And then the little guy that I'm holding down on the bottom, that is a western screech owl. And he's at the phase that we call branching. So when they're kind of just getting ready, they're too big to really be living in the nest, but they're getting ready to learn how to fly. We call them branchers because they'll be hanging out in the tree and moving around and hopping around on the branches. So he's actually got most of his feathers. We checked his wing feathers. Most of his flight feathers were almost in. So we were able to simply just take him back out to the tree that we found him in and put him back up in the tree so that they can finish hopping around and probably would be flying within a week of when we found him. So when approaching raptors, you do want to be careful. Like you see that barn owl is jumping at me. Red-tailed hawks often is their defense. They'll put their wings out and then they lean backwards so that they have their feet towards you and their talons, and they'll reach out and grab you. So again, if you're trying to pick one of these up or contain them, just be really careful of those talons. They're very sharp. They hurt. They have really good strength in their feet. So if you were to get a talon puncturing your hand, they're going to hold on really well. It happened to one of my coworkers. She accidentally got hit in the hand without wearing gloves, and we had to sedate the animal to get it to let it go. So just being really careful with them. And this next slide, this is a golden eagle, and that kind of gives you an idea of how big an eagle's feet are, and their talons are probably like 2 to 3 inches long. They have super heavy grips. You see I'm wearing very, very, very thick gloves in these pictures so that nothing happens. And then most of the time when we get them out, we actually wrap their feet, which is the picture on the left-hand side, so that they actually can't. There's no chance of anything happening to me or the person that is working on them. If we're giving them fluids or medicine or anything like that, we just don't want to take that chance. So make sure you're not taking that chance either. And they also have very sharp beaks, so watch out for their heads. They're made for ripping flesh. We just want to make sure your flesh is not also one of those that's being ripped. So baby birds, this is probably the most stressful time of year. Baby birds are very, very time and labor intensive. They usually need to be fed for about 12 to 14 hours a day. So basically from sun up to sundown. And depending on the size, like the little guys on the top left-hand side, they would need to be fed every 30 minutes. So every 30 minutes, one by one, we would be giving them a bug at a time. for each of those animals. So it's really, really time consuming. As they get older, it gets a little less, like the little scrub jays right below them. That might be about 45 minutes, every 45 minutes. But when you're doing that 12 hours a day, it's a lot of work. So in general, please do not pick up a baby bird, but there are always exceptions to this. So if the baby bird is in your cat's mouth, which is probably about half the baby birds that we would get in, please bring them to your local rehabber. Any animal that comes in contact with your cat's mouth. Cats have a lot of bacteria in their mouth, and they can cause really bad wounds. Even if you don't physically see any wounds, they can still get infections. So we usually would put them on antibiotics for a couple weeks just to be sure. So if it has no feathers, so if it's like the little guys on top or even the guy on the right, they are not quite ready to. So if you find them by themselves, you can pick them up. And a lot of people also have that fear that, oh, well, now that I've touched it, the parent will not take the animal back. And that's not true. Birds really can't even smell very well, depending on the species of bird. So, but if you pick it up, you can put it in a little box, put it on a heating pad, look around for parents. So it's not always easy to know what bird it is, like the little guys up top. That probably took us a while. I can't even tell you what species that is at the moment. I can't remember. But looking for adult birds that might be looking for babies, or look for nests, look for busy activity in certain places, because we might be able to get them back up in the nest. Or if the parents are around and we can't find the nest, we can make a fake nest and put it back up in a tree and watch for parents to come back. If they appear cold and fluffed, so if you were to find a nest of baby birds and you touch them and they're cold, they're not reacting to you, that wouldn't be a good sign. The little bird down on the bottom right, that's fluffed. So the feathers are kind of fluffed up. You can see he's trying to kind of insulate himself a little bit more by fluffing up those feathers. Something's probably wrong with that little bird, and I think he had a broken leg. So those are kind of signs that something's not quite right. If you've confirmed there are no parents in the area, then you can pick them up. It's really hard to confirm that there are no parents in the area sometimes because as they get older, they might not always be there. Some parents make it a little bit more easy to let you know they're there, like crows are very protective, jays are very protective. They might come down and dive bomb you, you know, when you've picked up their baby. Not all species are like that, but if you can sit and watch a nest or a baby for an hour and see if there's any other parents that are interested in them or seem to be coming in the area, as long as you're watching from a distance and not interfering. And if their nests are destroyed, pick them up, and again, you can call your rehabber and we can try and make another nest for them and get them back up in a tree with their parents. If they are alert and gaping, so gaping is what you see several of the birds doing there. They're opening their mouths. That means feed me. That's their sign to their parents. Feed me. Then chances are they are doing okay as long as they're vocal. I misspelled hopping, but if you see a bird on the ground, it's hopping around. That's okay because a lot of birds, most of the birds fledge out of their nests when they get too big, and they don't know how to fly yet, so they are on the ground and they are learning important things. Parents are going to be in the area teaching them how to forage for bugs on the ground. The hopping around on the ground and the practicing of flying is really important for building muscles, learning how to fly. The fledgling stage is usually about a week long. So out of those little scrub jays down on the bottom left, the one that's perching on the edge is closer to a fledgling stage. Most of the feathers are in. He's probably too big to be sitting in the nest. You see he's perching on the side. He's going to be hopping around a lot more. And so parents are going to not be as attentive. They're going to leave him for a little bit longer periods of time. So if they're hopping around, they're gaping, they're alert, they're vocal, those are all really good signs, and I would avoid picking them up. We can't save every little bird on the ground, especially we would get a lot of things. If it's a healthy bird, we knew the parents were there, we'd say leave it alone, and people would say, but the cats, but the raccoons. And unfortunately, that's all part of being a baby bird, is learning how to evade predators. Parents are usually around protecting it. If you have dogs and cats and you know you have some little fledgling baby birds, you can keep them inside or, only let the dog out supervised, on a leash. Those are all ways that you can help out these baby birds. Like I said, it's only for a few days, so it's usually not very long, but it's nice to the baby bird to do those things. There are millions of birds killed every year by cats and dogs, and it's actually threatening some species of songbirds. So being able to take those steps is really nice and helpful to everybody. So for adult birds, common things we saw were like window strikes. So if you put a bird, usually in a box, if you have a little box, put it in the box for 1 to 2 hours, and then open the box and see how it reacts. Sometimes they are just stunned and they recover pretty quickly and they'll be able to fly off. So we usually like to say, give them that 1 to 2 hours. If after that 2 hours they're not flying away, their head's turned, 180 degrees around, something's not right, they're tilting their head, they're not able to keep their balance, then bring it to your local rehabber. So that's, yeah, I had a funny story. Somebody called me and they had a bird that hit a window and it was sitting on their back porch and they're asking me what to do. And I started asking all the questions, how long has it been? How's it acting? And then while that was happening, a crow came down and ate the bird. So I was like, well, I guess we don't have to respond to this anymore. But again, just putting it in the box will make sure that it's safe from predators like that too, and it's not vulnerable. Or you can just let the circle of life happen. Diseases. So salmonella is something that we found. We have a little bird that comes to our area in the wintertime called pine siskin, and we see a lot of salmonella outbreaks in them, and a lot of these can be associated with bird feeders and bird baths. So if you are feeding birds, if you have a bird bath, you need to make sure that you are cleaning them constantly, every few days, cleaning them with bleach, hot water, boiling water, because bird feeders and bird baths attract so many birds that it makes disease very easy to be spread. It can be put into the seed, into the water, from them touching it all around, and if you have a lot of them coming to those areas, it's just an easy disease transmission. So, maybe don't fill it up so that it takes a week to empty. Just put a little bit of seed in there. A trick, which I talked about with pigeons earlier, so it's commonly seen in pigeons and doves. It's, I can't remember if it's like a fungus. I'm really bad right now. But it grows down kind of through their esophagus, and it gets kind of like this white chunky stuff, and it's really gross. But we would see that spread pretty easily in our pigeon population. So again, keeping feeders and bird baths clean can just be the first line of defense in these diseases. Cat caught, again, we talked about cats. It's a big one. Sticky traps. So that's a little Buick's wren on the sticky trap over there. So we would commonly see when a bird is stuck on a sticky trap, it's usually because there's bugs stuck on it. So they're going for the bugs on a sticky trap, and they get stuck on it themselves. I am personally not a fan of sticky traps, and I would say please do not use them. And for any animal, they're not really very humane. Try and find other ways of trapping mice and rats, but then you get the animals like this. If you do have a bird stuck on a sticky trap, please do not try and get it off with anything, or try and rip it off, because you're going to rip feathers out, and it takes them a long time to grow feathers back in, and that's very stressful to the animal. Again, getting it to your rehabber, we have special stuff that we can put on them to get them off the sticky traps, and then we also want to make sure we're not compromising their feather. I've had people like use baby oil and vegetable oil, which is all good. It does help get them off, but then their feathers are contaminated after that, and they're usually wet, and they can't get dry, and then they get cold, and that can lead to them dying. So again, just leave them on there, get them to your rehabber. I responded to a lot of birds trapped in houses, and it can be very tough because if they're healthy and they're flying and you have a big house, it's just not easy to chase a little tiny bird around. So usually the best thing, if you end up with a bird in your house, close off all your windows, any doors, cover, kind of make it as dark as you can. One window or one door open, they will typically want to go for the light, and then hopefully that will get them out of the house. If you have high skylights, we would often have that problem. That would be really tough when we come out and usually be able to get them or kind of get them down out of the skylights. But in general, if you can make the room as dark as you can, one source of light, they will want to fly towards the light. So for mammals, common mammal diseases that we saw. Distemper was a big one that we would see, especially in our raccoons. We would also see it in foxes. I haven't really seen it in coyotes and skunks as often. Usually symptoms are that they're really lethargic, they're acting abnormal, so they might not be affected by your presence. They don't really notice, or they just don't care. You would see like discharge from their eyes and from their nose, so kind of like they have a really bad cold. And sometimes it can also lead to skin, like skin sloughing. Distemper is, mammals can get it, can easily be transferred, and there is no cure for distemper, so we would have to euthanize for distemper. And there is no, not really like a good test that you can do immediately for distemper, so a lot of times if we suspected it was distemper, again, out of the herd health and out of health for all animals, within our county, we would usually euthanize. Rabies. So out on the West Coast, rabies vector species are skunks and bats. And I think on the East Coast, raccoons are also a rabies vector species. They are not on the West Coast. There has not been a reported case of raccoon carrying rabies in a very long time on the West Coast. So sometimes lethargic, foaming at the mouth, can be signs of rabies. Again, a lot of times if we just saw an animal that looked compromised, we would euthanize, again, just out of caution, that we don't want it to come in contact with anything else. A lot of people do have, centers will have special permits for skunks, bats, and raccoons. And in your area, it might be a little different. Like we technically didn't have the permit for skunks and bats, so we would have to take them to somebody else, but we had a gray area too where we could kind of respond. But if a skunk and a dog get in an altercation, then animal control needs to respond to that. So that's where it can kind of get a little confusing. But if you know who to call, they can at least lead you in the right direction sometimes. So that leads me to, please make sure your pets are vaccinated so that if they do come in contact with an animal that has any of these, has distemper or rabies, it will not be as bad for them. So if they are vaccinated, they are current on their vaccinations, they might just have to go through a little quarantine period to make sure that they don't come up with any of those symptoms, and then they'll be okay. If they are not vaccinated, it is not good. Each county will treat it differently, but it could lead up to euthanizing your pet, which you don't want to happen. So please make sure that they are current on all of their vaccines. And also make sure you are using caution when encountering these animals, because if you get bit by any of these mammals, raccoons, fox, coyotes, skunks, bats, even if they are not considered a rabies vector species, those animals will have to be euthanized and tested, and you will have to go through a series of rabies vaccinations, which are not very fun, and they're very, very expensive. So again, just using caution, like throwing a box on them and calling somebody who can handle these animals. Occasionally, we would also see scabies, also known as mange. It's like a mite on the skin. It can lead to hair loss, look really scabby. That can be treated. Again, that's going to have to do with herd health and what your patient load is at the center, because it is also something that is very contagious. So yeah, again, just using caution when encountering these animals, taking note of their behavior, and calling for help is always best with them. Except those little guys on the right, those are some of our baby raccoons that we raised. I think there's 12 in there. I think that's what I counted, 12, but I think there was actually 13 in there somewhere. So baby mammals, again, don't pick up the baby mammal unless you've talked to a rehabber or you're pretty sure something is wrong. So there are some animals that the parents do not always stay with their young. So rabbits, so like this is a little jackrabbit up top. Jackrabbits live independently. They are born precocious, so they hop around, they have all their fur from the time they're born. They'll be hiding in bushes. Mom comes back twice a day. Mom comes, all the babies run over, they do their nursing, they run back out, and mom runs away. So finding a baby jackrabbit by itself isn't necessarily um, unusual. If it was found, in a cat's mouth, then that's unusual and it would need to come to us. But for the most part, just leave them alone as long as they look alert. Same thing with deer. Fawns are often left by themselves for up to 12 hours a day. Don't touch them. There are some that are uncommon to be out alone, like if you were to find a very small baby raccoon out in the middle of the yard or in a driveway or in a parking lot. That is unusual. Parents usually aren't out during the daytime, so something happened at night to it. Again, calling your rehabber is always best. They can make sure that the animal is okay, it's hydrated, and we usually try and reunite them with their parents, and that would be done at nighttime. Raccoons have a fairly successful reunite rate, usually. If you're finding them alone, parents are usually not, are nearby. Maybe just something happened. And raccoon moms are really good about coming back and looking for their babies, for the most part. Again, coyotes are another one that if you found them, a coyote out in the middle of a field and it's really little by itself, or a fox, if you can stay and sit around for 30 minutes, an hour, and see if you see any adults in the area, if anybody, you can hear anything, if anybody looks like they're coming back for them, and it doesn't look like there could be a den in the area, then something might be wrong. This last year we had there was a baby coyote found in the middle of the road, and a trucker almost hit it and he stopped, and then he pulled off to the side of the road and watched for half an hour. Then he put it in a box and put it off to the side of the road, went and did something, came back, and it was still there, no sign of coyotes around. So then they called us. So something like that, if you can do stuff like that, it's really helpful for us. Baby squirrels, it should be a baby squirrel up in the top corner. If you were to find a squirrel that big by itself on the ground, something's happened to its nest or it's fallen out of the tree, so that is unusual. So in general, if the animals are warm and alert, don't touch them. If they seem quiet, cold, lethargic, or if you kind of see them alone, then call your rehabber. And again, please do not attempt to feed them. Make any homemade formulas, especially with baby animals. They have such specific formulas. We have formulas specifically for jackrabbits, specifically for squirrels, specifically for raccoons, and at different stages, depending on how old they are, to make sure that they are getting all the nutrients they need. If not, it can lead to bone malformations, metabolic bone disease, problems with feathers for birds, with their fur for mammals. So again, making sure you get them to the rehabber so that they can get them the best diet that they need. I threw in here possums because they are one of my favorite animals. I feel they are highly misunderstood. So one of the biggest reasons we get them in is orphaned. So we'll start in the bottom left picture. That is, we call them pouch babies. So that is a young possum that's actually probably about a month old and would still be living in the pouch of the mom. They would still be nursing. They would not be coming out at all. And we get a lot of these because moms are hit by cars. And so somebody has either gone and checked the mom for babies in the pouch, or you've seen the babies kind of get scattered around the road. So we raise a lot of litters like that from moms hit by cars. Picture on the right, that little guy is about the age where they would start climbing around out of the pouch and hanging onto mom's back while she's out doing things. Sometimes they fall off. Possum moms will have up to 13 babies. If one falls off, she really doesn't know and doesn't care and leaves them alone. So if you find a little guy that is smaller than your hand, they are not quite big enough to be on their own and probably need a little bit longer, a little bit more assistance. So you can call your wildlife rehabber. If they are bigger than your hand, they are actually going to be okay to be on their own. They're on their own from a pretty young age. A lot of them get attacked by dogs. So if you actually see here, we're releasing some baby possums we raised. And the one on the right is playing possum. It's an involuntary response. When they get scared, they just freeze, they drool, they poop, and they cannot move. Like nothing in their body will make them move until they think the threat is gone. Unfortunately, that leaves them to getting attacked by dogs and cats very easily. Mostly dogs by the adults. They just get so scared, they freeze, they become a good toy for dogs. Um, and don't be afraid of them. I would actually be like the least afraid of possums than anything. So they play dead. You usually put a blanket on top of them or a towel on top of them. You can pick them up at the base of their neck, the base of their tail, and get your hand behind their head to control their head. If you have heavy gloves, you can put those on because they can bite. But for the most part, um, they're they're pretty easy animals. They're way more afraid of you than you are of them. They cannot carry distemper or rabies, so don't worry about that. Their body temperature is a little bit lower than other mammals, so there are very few, I think there's like one or two cases of that ever being reported. It's something that is not common with them. So yeah, those are possums. We always had a soft spot in our heart for the possums that came into the center, especially the adults that would come in attacked by dogs. Um, so now we're going to have a question. So here's our pop quiz. This fawn is laying in tall grass alone. I have not seen a parent for several hours. Do I touch this animal? And so now we have a poll.
Okay, and the poll is
Say,
open.
yay! Everybody got that answer right. Yes, please do not. If the fawn, so you see, this fawn is sitting nice, tucked up in a ball. The grass was pretty tall here. This fawn is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. If it is quiet, it is just sitting there like that. That is everything right with this animal. Um, if you were to see a fawn like wandering around somewhere, crying, looking like they're looking for something, then something's wrong. But if you find them just like that tucked up, please do not touch them. Do not remove them. Don't do anything to them. Just let them be. The parents are not usually too far behind, and they have been taking care of them. I've dealt with a lot of calls where people, well-meaning, have just picked up the deer, and then we were never able to find where they came from or their parents. And deer are animals that are susceptible to high stress, so it is not good. For adult deer, um, probably one of the biggest things we had was them being hit by a car. And unfortunately, at least in the state of California, I'm pretty sure it's probably going to be the same everywhere else in the country. We are not allowed to rehabilitate adult deer. Again, due to that stress level. Can you imagine trying to have to approach an adult deer with a broken leg because their initial reaction is flight? They're just going to want to run, and they often end up dying from stress or from wounding themselves in their enclosures. So we are only able to rehabilitate fawns. Entangled deer. So we've had a lot of really fun and weird deer entanglements. So one that I've done several times is the picture that you see. Um, Deer will get caught in wrought iron fences, and it doesn't seem like they can go through them, but this one was not very wide. It was probably no more than 12 inches. This was a young buck. And if they get spooked in a yard that has a wrought iron fence, they will try and get through there. And they can usually get through until they hit their hips, and then they get stuck. So if you do see this, if you have a blanket, put it over their head. That helps calm the animal down because a lot of times they're just trying so hard to get through. They're going to be really rubbing the insides of their back legs raw, and they can sometimes hurt their legs too in doing this. So if we can just keep them calm. If it was a fawn, I would say just go behind, usually from behind, if you can, and you pull them backwards through the fence to get them out. And with a fawn, it's very easy. An adult deer is a lot harder. Be careful because they can kick you. So we usually had to sedate them for this. So that's where you would need to call somebody in who would be able to sedate the animal if possible. So yeah, so for this one, I just sedated him, was able to pull him right out of the fence, woke him up, and he went off on his way. So I've done a few like that. Bucks during rutting season can get entangled with other bucks. We had one where a buck got his antlers all tied up in a hammock in someone's backyard. I've had deer caught in like soccer nets. So we had a lot of things like that, usually calling someone in. Again, just being careful with deer. I've had some that have been calmer than others. If you can get their head covered, they might calm down a little bit, but don't try and do anything alone. They're very strong. It usually takes a few people to hold them down. And you don't want to get kicked and you don't want to get rammed. It does not feel very good when either of those have happened. And I've had that happen many times. So just be careful. Again, using common sense. If a deer is in the middle of the road, so you see him on a highway or a freeway or a high traffic area, please, please, please call 911 if you've hit the deer, so that just it's for the safety of everybody, so they can go out there and get the deer out of the road. Again, usually if a deer is hit by a car, it's not good, even if it's still alive. So they will have to usually be euthanized, or sometimes the highway patrol or the police officers will do what we call dispatching, and they will kill them there on the road. Again, because if a deer is down and not moving, or if it has broken legs and can't walk, we can't do anything. So just be aware that that does happen. I know I've been out to a lot of calls where people didn't realize that's what I was going to be doing, and so it's very upsetting. So just kind of keeping that in mind when that happens. So staying safe, using your common sense, and call for help. So that was pretty much everything I wanted to go over. Is there any questions out there about anything about animals, any situations?
Yes, Maria has a question. What is the largest
Okay.
animal you have ever taken in?
I would say as far as birds go, the eagles. Eagles, like, and I never had a bald eagle, but we did have the golden eagles, which are just slightly smaller than a bald eagle. They probably stand at least 2 feet, 2.5 feet high, and they weigh about, a healthy eagle is going to weigh close to 10 pounds, which doesn't sound very heavy, but when you're having to restrain a bird like that and hold them, it's really heavy, and they are really, really strong animals. As far as mammals go, the biggest that we were allowed to deal with was a coyote. We did not have permits for things like mountain lions or bears. So coyotes were the biggest mammal that I ever dealt with.
Okay, those are all the questions that we have.
Okay, well, if anybody has any more questions or any questions about anything with animals, working with animals, that's my email. You can email me any questions that you have.
Thank you to our presenter,
Yeah, thank you
Jamie,
so
for
much.
leading the session, and thank you for your participation tonight. If you have any questions or comments about tonight's topic, you may email Jamie directly using the contact information on your screen. As we close the webinar, a survey will open on your screen. You will be prompted to respond to a few evaluation questions. Please take a moment to share your thoughts on tonight's webinar. If you have any additional questions or comments whatsoever, please send an email to education@kkg.org. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.